Today, we will be comparing two of the most powerful laptops on the market right now with Apple's 2021 MacBook Pro with their M1 Max processor and comparing it to the latest and greatest from Dell with their Dell XPS 17 9720 with its 12th gen Intel Core i9 and to see from which one of these two is going to be the ultimate creative laptop in 2022. So, for the past 2 years, I have been using the Dell XPS 17 9700 which came out back in 2020 with its 10th generation Intel Core i7, 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and the NVIDIA RTX 2060 Max-Q graphics. And the XPS 17 has easily by far been my most powerful laptop I've owned to date, but especially over time with its battery life depleting and also for me transferring my workflow with working with tougher 4K and 8K codecs, it just wasn't being practical anymore to the point where I was doing majority of my work on my desktop while my laptop was slowly starting to turn more into a small productivity laptop, but even that was difficult because the battery would only last for roughly like 2 hours, like max. That was it. After 2 years of owning the 9700, I decided that it was time to let it go and was only about to make half the price that I paid for that laptop, which may not seem like much, but if we are talking about the Dell XPS, I think it was a fair bargain, so it is what it is. Obviously, when I sold it, I decided to take that money and invest it into a new device for a new laptop that can actually handle a lot of my workflows, currently with the tougher codecs with 4K and 8K, but of course something that actually has a proper amount of battery life and that's something that can actually last me quite a while before I have to upgrade within just a couple of years. Which leads us into today's video with us comparing easily two of the most ultimate and the most expensive laptops in 2022 with the Dell XPS 17 9720 with the 12th gen Intel Core i9 and comparing it to Apple's 2021 MacBook Pro with the M1 Max processor. And to be fair, I have never owned a MacBook, so I'm very curious to test out a MacBook for its very first time, and I want to see if this comparison is actually going to make me stick with the Dell XPS and just pretty much sticking with Windows, or is this comparison going to lead me more to the MacBook with the M1 Max and actually going into macOS. So we will be creating a list of categories to go through, and when we're going through it, we're going to be tallying a point to either side or to both if it does well in that particular category. So easily these two are pretty much spec'd out as similar as possible, and both of these laptops also have their own counterparts, especially with the MacBook Pro having a 14-inch model as well as a cheaper M1 Pro option, while the XPS has a bit more variety to choose from, especially with different CPUs, graphics, displays, and has their own 15-inch models. So definitely there is a lot of configurations, and of course going for the latest and greatest and the top tier specs within a laptop can also be a major downside as well, which we'll get on later in the video. Now our first category is going to be in the unboxing experience. Now I know it's obviously not too big of an issue, but especially with how much you're paying with these devices, it can be important to some people. Neither of them slouch in this category, especially with the MacBook Pro coming with its manuals, Apple stickers, and it does come with its MagSafe charger and a 140-watt power adapter. And when it comes to the Dell XPS unboxing, it does come in a bigger brown box, but once you get inside, it does come in a nice kind of a like matte black velvet with a more of a magnetic lid, which is a nice little touch to them. And it does come with the laptop itself. It comes with the charging, the adapter, and it also comes with a small little adapter, which is a Type-C to HDMI, since obviously there is no HDMI port on the Dell XPS. So when it comes to the unboxing on both of these laptops, they both get a point in this category. Next up, we'll go into the different design aspects of each of these laptops. Now, when it comes to ports, the MacBook has 3 Thunderbolt 4 Type-C ports. It has a MagSafe port, SD card slot, a headphone jack, and an HDMI 2.0 port. So definitely when it comes to ports on the MacBook Pro, definitely there are quite a bit to choose from. And when it comes to the Dell XPS, it has 4 Thunderbolt 4 Type-C ports, it has an SD card slot, and it has a headphone jack. Now, when it comes to build quality, the MacBook has an all aluminum body, which surprisingly can be pretty cool and quiet, especially even under intense workloads. But I honestly like the material on the Dell XPS a bit more, especially when it comes to those carbon fiber palm rests, which just makes it really nice, especially for long-term typing. And the keys definitely do feel a bit more smoother to type on and just a little bit more of a pleasurable experience. However, both of these devices do an amazing job when it comes to the build quality and just the overall design aspect of each of these laptops. So both of them, of course, get a point in this category. As for displays, both of these look amazing, especially with the XPS having 2 different options in a 17-inch HD, which is more of an anti-glare look, and it also does have a 4K option, which is also touchscreen and is more of anti-reflective. And both of them coming at 500 nits brightness, whereas the 16-inch MacBook Pro has the Liquid Retina XDR display with a 1000 nits sustained brightness and can even get to 1600 nits for peak brightness with a P3 color gamut. Now, even though both of these displays are amazing to look at, I am going to give the point more to the MacBook Pro Pro over the XPS, since especially when we are comparing this on a creative standpoint, the MacBook definitely seems to have a bit more of a color accurate display. Since the XPS can tend to be a bit oversaturated, you can fix it by getting a monitor calibrator, but that is something that you're gonna have to do third party, and it's not something that you get right out of the box. Also, it does have 120Hz with its ProMotion display. It can be a much nicer and smoother experience overall. But to be fair, I will still give half a point to the XPS just because, especially if you are just doing regular productivity or even video streaming, it is still an amazing display to look at. And also, it does have a 4K touch option, whereas the MacBook doesn't have that touchscreen. And also, the XPS doesn't have to deal with that notch at the top. And also, the XPS does have face recognition sensors. So guys, we are testing out with the MacBook Pro camera, and we have the audio coming from the laptop as well. But the MacBook Pro has a 1080p camera, whereas the Dell XPS has a 720p camera. And I will say that the camera noise levels on the MacBook definitely seem to be a lot better compared to the Dell XPS, where there is a lot more noise, especially if you're not getting decent lighting. But either way, both of these cameras are going to be relatively decent. Neither of them are perfect. They're not going to be as good as a smartphone camera or a DSLR or mirrorless, but they will do, especially for just your online calls, meetings, you name it. So again, average cameras, but again, they both look fine and they both work well for what they do. This is the one category that has honestly really blown my mind, and one of the things that has actually made me really enjoy the MacBook Pro is the speakers on this are easily superior compared to the Dell XPS 9720. Now, I will admit that the 9720 speakers have gotten a lot better over time, but it still falls in comparison compared to the MacBook Pro. It's honestly incredible to see what Apple has done with this particular machine. So definitely when it comes to speakers, full point goes over to the Mac, with it just sounding incredibly good. Like it's impressive. Now, getting deeper into the actual performance between both of these laptops, there is obviously a lot to go over, especially with both of these systems kind of being a bit different, with Apple being a bit more of a native and closed off system, whereas the XPS is a bit more of an open and more of a free system. So when it comes to the native system of the MacBook Pro, the pros about it is that there are going to be a lot less issues, and it's going to be a lot more refined when it comes to Apple Silicon and a lot of the apps that it supports. So you are going to get a lot just of a smoother experience when it comes to working with macOS. But when it comes to the negatives of a native system, it is going to be closed off, which means that you can't really upgrade the memory or the storage later on, which means that especially when you are purchasing this device, you have to be very careful of what you want to get early on, because you can't change it after purchasing. Where that is different on the Dell XPS, since when you buy your machine, obviously a lot of it is kind of finalized, but the two biggest things that you can change later on is the memory and the storage options. So if you are someone who wants to put a higher capacity SSD in there, or even higher capacity RAM, you can easily do that with the Dell XPS 17. But when it comes to the negatives of a more open and free system, there are going to be a lot more issues when it comes to driver compatibility, and especially having the NVIDIA RTX 3060 as discrete graphics, it is going to draw a lot more power, not making it nice on the battery life. And of course, keeping in mind that majority of Windows laptops need to be plugged in order to attain its full performance, compared to the MacBook, where whether it's plugged in or not, you are going to be getting the same performance regardless. So that is something to keep in mind when you are looking at either of these options. Now, when it comes to a creative mindset, especially when it comes to video editing, playback, and render times on either of these machines, both of these have been well optimized in both Adobe Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve to play back most modern codecs well, especially with the M1 Silicon having a dedicated media engine to decode and encode codecs, while with the XPS and its 12th gen Intel Core processor, it does have its impressive integrated graphics, which can easily crush codecs like H.265 and so many more. And of course, having the NVIDIA RTX 3060, it can obviously dominate a lot more high resolution files as well. Between them, I haven't dealt with any major stuttering issues. However, the fan can be a lot more audible, especially in the Dell XPS 17. Whereas the MacBook Pro, I've literally only heard the fan once when it came to the laptop having low battery and when I was rendering out 8K files. So definitely, if fan speed is something that is crucial to you, and if you want something that's a bit more quiet, more non-obtrusive, then the MacBook will definitely do you more justice in that. And for those who are curious on the benchmarking aspects of either of these laptops, I did run both Geekbench 5 and Cinebench R23 for both single and multi-core performance, and the 12900 HK definitely scored quite a bit higher compared to the M1 Max, and is definitely an incredible CPU. But also keeping in mind that the Intel processor is quite a bit more power hungry and power intensive, which can lead to substantially less battery life. which gets us into our next segment. And honestly, probably one of the most important, especially to me for a laptop, is battery life. Again, the biggest issue that I had owning the 9700 was especially how quick the battery life can deplete on that machine, especially the fact that I went from about 6 to 7 hours when I first had it, and especially after about a year or two, it went from 7 hours to about like 4 hours. And especially in 2022 with the 9700, I was only able to get like about 2 hours max, which again, especially if you want a portable machine to take with you, and especially for a college student, 2 hours is really not gonna cut it. And the XPS kind of just turns into a laptop where you really just need to have it plugged in all the time, and it's just more of a portable workstation rather than a portable laptop. Of course, taking a look at the 9720, for the most part, it does seem to be a pretty similar story when it comes to productivity and streaming. I'm able to get up to 10 to 11 hours worth of battery life, and if I am doing any intensive workloads, I can only get up to about 6 to 7 hours, which is still really good. But of course, keep in mind that these batteries will typically deplete quite a bit over time, and it's not going to retain its same battery life within a year or two. So I am sure that it's going to be similar. Again, I haven't done a long-term test with this laptop, especially since it just came out a couple months ago, but by looking at it, I wouldn't be surprised if it deals with the same drawbacks as the 9700. However, the story definitely changes when we are talking about the MacBook, because as I did say, with that native system, you are going to have less issues. Battery life is incredible, especially the fact that if you are just doing productivity and video streaming, you can easily get up to a day's worth of battery life, and you're not even going to need to charge it for the entire day. But if you are doing a lot more intensive workloads, like you are doing video editing playback, rendering, 3D work, you are going to be getting relatively 7 to 8 hours of performance. And especially since it came out back in late 2021 with a lot of people owning it back then and seeing what they have to say about it now in 2022, battery life seems to perform the exact same. So to me, the MacBook definitely nails it in this category, especially for battery life. And if you are someone like a college student like me, or if you are looking for a portable laptop rather than a portable workstation where it needs to be something that needs to be plugged in all the time, the MacBook is easily going to win in that category. Now, obviously, since we need to catch up to assign points to both of these laptops, both of them get a point on a creative standpoint when it comes to video editing, playback, and render times, since both of these can easily crush 8K files, which is insane to see. But the Dell XPS can be a bit more hot to the touch, and the fans to be a bit more loud when it comes to playback and render times. So that is also another thing to keep in mind. The Dell XPS 17 definitely gets a point when it comes to being slightly more powerful with single and multi-core performance, and especially for those that are running Windows native apps, or even if you are gaming, it's obviously a no-brainer to go with the Dell XPS 17. So definitely when it comes to being more powerful, the Dell XPS 17 gets a point in that category, but a massive point goes over to the MacBook Pro in battery life, and honestly can be a very important category for a lot of people who want more of a portable laptop rather than a portable workstation. When it comes to a laptop that I'm going to be continuing with, after doing extensive testing with both of these machines while I've had them in my possession, I've decided that I am going to make the switch over to macOS and going to the MacBook Pro with its M1 Max. Now, obviously, I still do have my main PC with the Intel Core i9-12900K and the RTX 3090, so it makes sense that that's going to be my main workstation. But it's really hard to not see what Apple is offering with the latest MacBook Pros, with the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. The fact that you are able to get really good performance, especially as a creative for both photo and video editing. Also just to see how in tune the battery life is with this, and of course how smooth and quiet and cool this machine can be. Since I also do use the iPhone 13 Pro Max on the side, definitely when it comes to having AirDrop, it just makes transferring files so much easier. And there's just a lot of gimmicks within the Apple ecosystem that is just really nice and really intuitive. But personally for me, I don't want to get completely stuck in the Apple ecosystem because I know that it can be very expensive, but also to keep in mind that the Dell XPS 17 is no slouch when it comes to performance. And honestly, was very surprised to see how many codecs and how many different workloads that this thing can easily be able to crush. Another thing to keep in mind is especially with the variety that you can choose from with this laptop, especially if you don't need that 4K touch and you are perfectly fine having that HD display, and also even going for the integrated graphics with Intel Iris Xe, and especially with a lower end CPU, which can easily still handle a lot of these workflows, I'm sure that you will be getting a lot better battery life with those lower end specs. Again, it's not going to be as spec'd out as the model that we have right here, but if you definitely do want better battery life on the XPS, I would highly recommend looking at that HD display, and of course just going for more integrated graphics rather than relying on discrete graphics with the NVIDIA RTX 3050 or the 3060. Overall, both of these devices are extremely impressive in 2022, and especially that they can rival some workstations out there. I'm sure they are going to be great options for those who are creatives and for those who need this kind of power. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, comment, and subscribe, especially with this video by far being the most expensive video I have made to date. But I hope you guys enjoyed my analysis between the two. And if you guys have any questions regarding both of these machines or wanting to know further things, obviously type it in the comments below. I'm more than happy to respond to you guys there, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace. Now, when it comes to switching over to the MacBook Pro, I am a little bit nervous because it is my first time that I am switching to this configuration. Oh, we're filming a video right now? Oh, so sorry. Dude, can I just not have you for one video? Like, just one video.
Switching over to Mac?
Yeah, I know. I'm just gonna take this, but no, you can't. No, it's my laptop. You can't have it. You know what? Bro,
Why do I even come?
Right, where was I?